I'm Spartacus Olson.
And I'm Ian Sowden.
And this is the Time Ghost podcast. Now, you might assume this has to do with our channel, Time Ghost History, and you're absolutely right. We will be talking a lot about history, but about a bunch of other stuff, personal stuff and topical stuff. Sparty, tell them where they can see this and what they can expect.
Well, you can get our podcast on our YouTube podcast channel, Time Ghost Podcast, but you can also see it on all the regular RSS-based feeds like iTunes and at Amazon or wherever you get your podcast usually.
Now, Ian is here because Sparty and I babble. So he's not just our podcast slave, like in the good way, but he's here to keep us on track when we ramble. And since when we do this live, we're answering a bunch of questions from our patrons. He's here to feed us questions. And that means that if you want us to answer your questions live, you should join us on Patreon at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And where are we starting today?
Well, we have a pretty exciting place to start. I think it's a theme that you'd like very much, Indy. Baseball. Okay. So,
baseball?
Gianni Verschuren. I'm sorry,
Gianni Verschuren. He's the tie guy. He's the guy that comments on all my ties. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Well,
we love Gianni.
Johnny, he says, so I'll repeat my question from last time to see if we will have any coverage of baseball and the effects of the war on players like Ted Williams. But more importantly, please show us a better look if episode 193 Kilroy was here tie. I got to see it, so I think you like.
Okay, well, when this edited comes out, we can put in right now a close up on me and the Kilroy was here tie. I saw your comment about that. You said the vest covers it up too much, and I have to see that magnificent tie or magnificent beast or something like that. But I'm surprised that you.
We can send the tie to. We can send a picture of it directly to you, Johnny. I'm sure that Astrid is a huge Gianni fan, and our whole tie thing came from the idea that we wanted to be a little bit different than we'd been in the past and create sort of an every week look for like normal people do. You don't dress the same every week for 6 years. So,
well, I did on the Great War.
Yeah, you do, but that was not the way. That's the point.
But that was what I wore in real life.
No, but that was in the 1910s. People had less clothes. So.
That's true.
The 1940s was more of an explosive fashion time. So Astrid wanted to be true to that. And she went on eBay and she got enormous amounts of ties. And
she still does.
That's how it started. And for a long time, we were selling these ties every week.
Yeah.
But right now, she's actually doing something special. She's gathering all of the ties that Indy is using in every episode. They're numbered. They're put in boxes. They may be reused at some point, but if the war is over, you will have the possibility of getting one of those ties.
But we already sent one to Johnny, though, right? Because I remember that.
We did, but it was a bit of a sad story because I don't know if you got a new one, Johnny. I hope you did. But this was in the early days of COVID, and Astrid sent his favorite or your favorite ties, Johnny, to you. And they got lost in the mail. They just disappeared. It's quite sad. Astrid speaks about it over and over again. And she says, I got to send new ties to Johnny. So, Johnny, we'll show you the tie in a direct message.
Hey, just so you know, a slight thing I just noticed that's going to be something for technical issues and people who are watching this live can go, oh, they're doing this live. For some reason, as soon as we started recording, your voice is no longer playing in my AirPods, but is playing from the computer, even though preferences on the computer say it is playing in my AirPods. Well, I'll leave them in.
Well,
and every now and then let's see, talk.
Okay.
Nope, didn't make a difference. They went boom when I put them back in. Well, okay, I'll just turn you down here so we don't get too much feedback, and we'll sort that out later. Because I'd love to answer Johnny's question. But there's still more to say about the ties, by the way. Because when we started doing the ties, and we had all these ties, and people started wanting to buy them, then I had to create Indy's Tie Barn, right? To sell them. And I think those might be my favorite videos I've ever made, are the videos for Indy's Tie Barn. When at the end of an episode, Astrid would say, okay, take off the tie, now tell me what the tie is about. And I just have to make stuff up. And it was entirely improv. And if you watch those 40 or 50 videos about the different ties. I think that's some of the best comedy I've ever done. I don't know if you guys agree, but
I love it. I mean, I've spent many hours watching Tie Barn videos just because they're funny.
Really weird.
I'm a fanboy.
Cut off. But anyhow, Johnny, to answer your question, which is for some of our fans a bit niche, because about 55% of our audience doesn't really have any interest in baseball, I would assume, because they don't live
55%.
Well, Japan, the United States, the Dominican Republic, places where they play baseball, then sure, they'd be interested in the answer to this question. But
yeah, but Johnny is a baseball fan, and he's not American.
It's because Johnny's a discerning gentleman. I've seen his comments about my ties. But the question was, let's see, you wrote it out for me here, Ian. Will we have any coverage of baseball and the effect of the war on players like Ted Williams? What he means is Ted Williams was he was a huge star. He's still regarded as one of the best players, best hitters in history. And he broke in 1939. And in 1941, he became the last player to hit 400 for a season. 1942, he won the Triple Crown. And then he missed 1943, 44, and 45, being in the Second World War. And he came back just where he picked up. And he also fought in the Korean War, and he missed like 2.5 seasons for the Korean War. So when he retired in 1960, he has these fantastic career numbers, but people thought, well, without the seasons, or with the seasons, he wouldn't have missed in wartime. He may well have had like the all-time home run record, which was Babe Ruth's 714 at the time. And yeah, it's possible. But I think more than him and like a pitcher like Bob Feller, who did not get 300 wins, or Ted Lyons, who also did not get 300 wins because they spent 3 or 4 years serving in the military. Beyond those guys are Hall of Famers. Those guys had their careers back. If I was going to do a special, one, it wouldn't be just baseball, because other nations have sporting leagues where star players were affected by the war. But two, it would be about those players who were stars but had their careers derailed because of the war. And again, Ted Williams is a Hall of Famer. We still regard him as one of the greatest players of all time. Cecil Travis, on the other hand, before the war, the last 4 or 5 years before the war, was absolutely on an all-time Hall of Fame trajectory. A brilliant player, brilliant fielder, brilliant hitter. And, he had some issues in the war. I think it was him that had the frostbite toes, although I might be confusing that with someone else, but I'm pretty certain it was him. And he came back and he was still good, but he wasn't Cecil Travis anymore. And his career didn't last that long after the war. And of course, he's not in the Hall of Fame. And the casual fan has no idea who Cecil Travis is today, where even people that aren't baseball fans have heard of Joe DiMaggio and stuff, So I think if we were going to do a special, it would more likely be a special about the fate of athletes that were robbed of their immortality by the war, shall I say, right?
Well, yeah, both literally and not. But I mean, there's also a continuation of all of that, and that's what happens after the war. How sport becomes a way for reconciliation. I mean, we started when Indy and I started. Actually, when Indy, I, and Astrid started working together on historical stuff, our first project was about the 1896 Olympics, how they came about, and how Pierre de Coubertin created that. And a ridiculous amount about early Olympic history. And his idea was basically that the world could come together in celebration of the differences of nations, but also the greatness of individual athletes, and find a peaceful way towards competition instead of war. Very difficult topic, and it didn't really come through. I mean, you should watch our episode about the 1936 Olympics to see how Pierre de Coubertin's idea was very much then instrumentalized to create the very opposite of what he wanted to achieve. But if you go into after World War II, there's a huge event, and that's the first World Cup in the 1950s, 56, when the Germans are allowed to come back and compete. And this has become national mythology here in Germany. I mean, it's a huge thing, but it was also a huge thing back then in the day. And ever since World War II, sport has grown bigger than ever before, and has remained both a tool for political manipulation and a way to actually diffuse conflict.
Do you remember, a very, very entertaining movie, but one of the dumbest movies about World War II ever. Escape to Victory with Sylvester Stallone and Max von Sydow. Did you see
Yeah,
that?
of course I do.
When
Yeah.
it's about, all these prisoners of war held by the Nazis are gonna play a big soccer football game against the German team. And Sylvester Stallone is this American guy who doesn't actually really know how to play. So he ends up being their goalkeeper. Of course, he ends up being great. But
Because goalkeepers don't need to know how to play.
no, they don't need it. But he was good at catching stuff because I guess he played American sports for some reason. I haven't seen it in like 25 years. I remember Max von Sydow being a German general and he applauding the prisoners when they made good plays, and the high command didn't like that. And then they all escaped.
How many times was Max von Sydow a German general actually in his almost 100 years of life?
Probably at least once for every year of life. Yeah.
I would suspect it. Yeah. I mean, it's the go-to solution if you can't find a German to play a German. Get a Swede.
It'd be like, okay, I'm pitching a film. Okay, guys, I got this film idea, right? It's 1943, right? And it takes place in the German army, right? Is Max von Sydow in it? Yeah, I was thinking we'd get Max von Sydow. That's how it always goes. He's part of the pitch.
Yeah. I think it's greenlit.
Yeah.
Actually, he did one of my favorite intros to a movie. I'm not a big Lars von Trier fan, but the movie Zentropa, which is also about the post-war period in Germany, takes place in 1945, just after the war has ended. And he did the opening to that, and it's a train ride that goes through tunnels, and Max von Sydow's amazing deep voice comes in, and he goes like, on the count of 10, you will be in Europa. 9. You are traveling into darkness. And it just goes on like that. It's massive. It's so cool.
And the best thing about Max von Sydow is his name is Max von Sydow. That's a bad guy's name.
It is.
It's a bad guy's name.
He was almost as tall as I am.
Yeah? Did he have a complex about that?
Well, we all do.
I thought he had a complex because he was not quite as tall as Spartacus Olsen was.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. Yeah. I never met Max. I would have loved to.
I would have loved to meet him too. I've got to answer the second part of that baseball question. Sorry. Hey, Indy, will you ever make more Sunday baseball videos? I've never been into baseball, but I love your baseball videos. And that's signed Sionra. And that's the best compliment you could have. It's like, okay, I remember I saw Prodigy play at the Lollipop Festival in Stockholm in 1996. The first time I saw Prodigy play. And I thought, I don't particularly like the Prodigy's music. I don't dislike it, but it's not something I would listen to at home. But I would always go to see them live because that's the best live show. So if someone says to me, I'm not interested in baseball, but I really like your show about baseball, then yeah. And that's the season we made was in 2013. For those of you who don't know, it was the very first thing I ever did on YouTube. It was just with a couple of friends, just a thing about weirdness of the magic weirdnesses of baseball history. And when we did it, I think there were 16 episodes, and at the end of it, I had like 200 subscribers. And people write in and say, "Oh, I found your show, and it's really funny," and it's because it is funny, it's good. And now, of course, people have found it because I'm famous from YouTube, but it's still only 700,000 or 800,000 subscribers, and people write 1,000, not 100,000, write every week. When are you doing more of these? When are you doing more of these? And I wrote like basic synopses for like the next 50 episodes. I was ready to do. I have like the actual plot lines for them. It's really a question of time. I mean, other than finishing the weekly World War II stuff, I would rather do Sunday baseball than the specials and things that I actually have to do, and that's honest. I mean, I enjoy doing them, but I would prefer to do Sunday baseball because it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I think the reason the person who doesn't like baseball but isn't interested in baseball, but likes the series, is because the show isn't just so much about baseball, but is baseball as a cultural idiom and how so much of the history is changed by the weirdness and stuff, especially in the 1880s and 1890s that I like to talk about and stuff. It's just a question of time.
If this didn't come across in what Indy just said, Indy is actually a bona fide baseball historian. we have tested him at many points and asked him for batting averages and stuff from absolutely obscure years, and he just spits them out as if it was fresh in memory to him. It's a fascinating thing.
It's funny because that was sort of. I mean, I love statistics, and baseball is a game of numbers. But when my mom gave me a book called Inside Baseball by Arthur Daly when I was a kid, and he had written it in 1950, and she gave it to me in like 1975. When she started taking me, my English mom took me to baseball games, and she was the only parent that liked baseball, and I was the only of the 5 kids, or 4 at the time, that liked baseball. So I'd go with her, 10 or 15 games a year. And so she gave me, and I was interested in the baseball history and who these players were. I'd heard about Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner. So she gave me this book. It was written basically for like teenagers, like 13, 14-year-olds. And I was a bit young, but I plugged my way through it. And Arthur Daly had been a sports writer, and he had written all these columns through the middle and beyond the middle of the 20th century. And it was called Inside Baseball, a half century of our national pastime. And it had sections called Day Before Yesterday, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And Day Before Yesterday were the players that were famous from in 1900 to 1920. And yesterday was 1920 to 1940. And today was 1940 to 1950. And tomorrow was players in, like, when he was writing this in 1949 or 1950 that he thought were going to be big stars in the future. He was actually wrong about most of them, but that's what made it really interesting, because they were, people that seemed like, some of them he was right. Yogi Berra he was right about. But that book, I remember, I still vividly remember running downstairs, and I'm like 7 or 8 years old, and going, Mom, guess what? She's like, what? I go, did you know that from 1921 to 1925, over that entire 5-year period altogether, Rogers Hornsby actually averaged .403. He had a 400 batting average for a 5-season period. And Mom's like, so, wow, son, that's great. And I was like, yeah. And from 1921 to 25, he hit 397, 401, 389, 424, and 403. And yes, those are his actual batting averages. You can look it up, look up Rogers Hornsby, and those are his batting averages from 1921 to 1925. I can tell you some more of his batting. Like, for example, in 1928 with the Braves, he hit 387, still the Braves' 20th century record. And in 1929 with the Cubs, he hit 380, still the Cubs' 20th century record. But that's
bless Mrs. Nidell, the poor woman.
But Mom was like, she's like, what the fuck have I done? Because I used to do that all the time. I go, Mom, you're not going to believe it. Harry Heilman.
Hang on, Indy. Does that question refer to giving you the book or giving birth to you?
It was giving me the book and starting me on the path to, because all I wanted for Christmas or birthdays for years was books about baseball history, which of course the only way you can compare stuff is the numbers and the stats and things like that. And so I would just drink it in. So yeah.
Have you ever thought about writing a book about it?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, I have thought about writing books about it, but that's not what I do now. I write scripts now. I had an idea, and Johnny, this might interest you. I had an idea for a 20-part series called Deadball, right? That followed the Deadball era, began in 1901 and ended in 1920, and there's reasons for that which I won't get into. But it would literally be a season by season, which is it's a great evolution of American pop culture, American politics, American jingoism, as seen through the eyes of the evolution of baseball, which was of course the most popular sport by far in the United States. I mean, and it's certainly the most spectator sport that you play. Horse racing was very popular as well, but beyond that. But it also has to do a lot with gambling and the rise of the mega gamblers before Prohibition and stuff. But yeah, it's an idea, and I would love to get like financing by the Hall of Fame, but I'd also have to have the time to write it, because I'm still writing this World War II series, and I have no idea how long that's going to last, This war could go on forever, right, Sparty? Well, what do you think?
This war could go on forever. I mean, some people would argue that it's not over, but yeah.
Well, you know what, guys? Speaking of this war, I think that gives me a really good segue over to our next question from our community, and this one's coming from Michael. And how could I segue this? Well, we're talking about baseball, and two people you would not want on your baseball team are Vyacheslav Molotov and Sergei Lavrov, two former and current foreign ministers in the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation. And Michael He's coming from Nebraska, and he says, "Go Big Red," which is a Nebraska team, I suppose. He's saying that
I like you're like, I suppose. Okay. Yeah, good research.
Wait a minute, Ian. Are you not a U.S. citizen?
I keep my international background secretive and close to my chest.
Ah, Mr.
I
Bond,
see.
so nice to have you here.
Exactly, just like for cocktails.
If you would be a U.S. citizen, you're at risk of having your citizenship rescinded now. But yeah, go ahead.
Anyway, Michael is asking you two the similarities in public statements between Molotov and today's Lavrov on their neighbors, such as Finland, Poland, and Ukraine. Well, Ukraine wasn't a Soviet neighbor, but
Okay.
I think I saw that question. I mean, he's referencing how Molotov says that the Soviet Union has invaded Poland because Poland has ceased to exist, and they needed to invade to save Russians from oppression or something like that, which is more or less identical to what Lavrov and Putin are saying about Ukraine. And I think his question was also towards if this is a authoritarian thing or a Russian thing that has kind of created that similarity and that tradition. And some historians have made a link between the Tsar era and their disinformation, modern Soviet Union and Russian disinformation. But that argument is often based on how Gregory Potemkin built fake model villages in Crimea to impress Russian leader Catherine the Great when she came to visit in 1783. That's, by the way, where the word Potemkin villages, meaning huge government projects that are meaningless and unfinished and were only constructed for propaganda purposes, comes from.
I had
But
no
here's
idea.
the-
I really had no
Really?
idea about it. No, I had no idea.
That's a
Wow,
pretty,
thanks.
pretty cool story, but there's actually a problem with that, Indy, now that you say that. Because here's the thing, right? A, that's probably an apocryphal story. B,
Okay.
disinformation has been around all over the place since as long as we have records. And C, Soviet disinformation was a beast all to itself. As well, you know that, Indy, and I know that.
I have
I mean,
no
we
idea what
still
you're talking
suffer-
about.
Really, you don't? No, of
No.
course not. How could you? But I mean, we still suffer from it. I mean, movies have been made about how the CIA killed JFK, right? Kennedy.
Yeah.
But that is a documented disinformation campaign started by the KGB, spread by the KGB, and inserted into Western mythology to the point that we can't get rid of it. I mean, it's been 60, almost 70 years now.
And we
No,
know that the truth
65.
was that it was my uncle,
Yeah, of course,
Lee
it was-
Nidell, who is actually Lee Harvey Oswald, who
Yeah.
this is a story for another day, or else later on if we have
But
more
I mean,
time.
I'll just say this much. I'll just break in with this much.
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald is Indy's uncle. Mind my
Yeah,
words.
not was.
Is
Not was.
Is.
Still alive.
We'll tell you the story. We'll tell you a story some other day. But anyway,
Really good story, though.
It's a great story. But after World War II, Stalin apparently even gave these deliberate efforts the name Disinformation. And true to the word itself, and with a heavy dose of irony, I think it was a 1952 edition of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, they defined it as meaning, and I'm quoting from my mind here now, so I don't have it, but basically meaning dissemination in the press and in media of false reports that are meant to mislead public opinion. And that entry then goes on to suggest that the main victim in the world at the time of such efforts was the Soviet Union, because it was mainly Western countries that used that kind of tactic. I mean, but
Right.
of course that was all part of the disinformation campaign in itself.
But you got to realize, of every authoritarian regime, the number one thing you've got to remember is they're always the victim. You're always
Yeah,
the
of course.
victim. You're always
I mean,
the
that's
victim.
the whole, the gaslighting and whatnot. We've talked about that in our episodes, and we'll probably get back to it again. But in any case, the tradition of a constant barrage of lies, deny everything and distort everything you can sort of policy, it goes back to early Stalinist times, not Tsarist times, but really early Stalinist times. And it stayed a Soviet tradition until the very end in 1991. And you'll remember that the boys in the Kremlin in 2022, Putin, Lavrov, all of them were Soviet-trained agents and politicians. And Putin has quoted his KGB training as including instructions on how to act if he would be caught, or if they would be caught, in the act of murder. And according to Vladimir himself, what they were told to do, even if they would be caught in the middle of the day, in the middle of West Berlin, with a gun in their hand and the corpse at their feet, even if people had seen them pull the shot, was to deny everything, lie and lie again.
Okay.
That was the method they used.
Okay, I got to stop you for a second, because you just reminded me of an episode from my own life. Apparently, I learned something from the Soviet Union. I didn't realize that, but this I'm casting my mind back to this would be like 1984. So I'm still in high school. I'm like 16 or 17 years old, and I had my mom's car, and I'd gone to a movie with a couple of friends. And I was backing out. It was the Meyerland movie theater. For anybody from Houston, you know where Meyerland is. It was where Meyerland Plaza was, the movie theater right there. And I'm backing out. I don't remember the movie. I'm backing out of the parking lot, and another car was sort of backing up, and I backed into them. Not very hard, just a ding like that. And I'll stop, and I get out. And they also were teenagers. They were also like, 16, 17, 18 years old. And there was no damage to the car or anything, but being a good citizen, I gave him my phone number and said, okay, well, call. And my dad got a phone call like a few days later. The great thing about the end of this story is there's such a big hole in it that Dad never noticed. My dad got a phone call a few days later from somebody saying that their car, that was like $1,500 worth of damage, and the paint and they could, and Dad's like, did you back into somebody's car? And I said, no. And he's like, no, son, I mean, these things happen, but it's a lot of money and stuff. I'm like, no, I don't know what they're talking about. See, the thing he did not ask was, how do they have your phone number? He never, ever asked that. But he goes, like, Sonia, listen, son, are you sure? I'm like, Dad, I don't know what they're talking about. And the next day he's like, well, just so you know, an insurance adjuster is coming over here, and he's going to take a paint sample from the back of your mom's car, and he's going to match it to their car. So if we hit their car, they're gonna know that you hit their car. Son, I just, I understand. You don't want but did you hit their car? And I said, no, I didn't. I told you that I didn't hit their car. And the paint guy came over and checked out our car, and the paint did not match. And I got an apology from my dad saying, son, I'm such a jerk. I asked you for the truth. You told me the truth, and I didn't believe you, and I'm really sorry. Sorry. And I'm like, oh, Dad, it's okay. I probably would, being magnanimous, probably would have done the same. All I can think is maybe they had a hit and run or a wreck of some kind, and since they had my phone, I don't know. I can't think of what could possibly have let me get away with this. But if it worked for me and my dad, boy, I'm painting myself to be a sterling character here. If it worked for me like that, then I can totally see why they used it in the Soviet Union. Because if it'll work on a car wreck, it wasn't even a wreck, then it'll work on anything, right?
Yeah, it does. And the whole repetition of lies and repeating it over and over again is, of course, part of the playbook, not just by the communists, but also by the Nazis. They follow the same. We've made a lot of content about this that you can look up. But in any case, to get back to the question and to answer it in a more concise way, no, it's not a coincidence that Molotov and Lavrov sound the same, but it's not a Russian tradition per se. It's a Soviet tradition. And I think Indy intimated it earlier here that authoritarian regimes tend to lie more than democratic regimes. But I'd say that the onslaught of fake news in recent years, even if a lot of it does come from Russian troll farms, shows us that democracies are not impervious to these tactics. It's just a lot harder to get away with it when there's a free press, which is why we need a free press, obviously.
Good point. Okay, so Ian, Love Slave Ian.
Let us move along over here. Let me get a nice segue. Indy, you're just talking about cars and accidents, and what wasn't an accident was Sardinia and Greece in World War II and the Allied operations there. Am I getting good at these segues?
You're getting good at it, but you mean the lack of Allied operations there, I'm thinking, but still, okay. So
Oh,
no,
boy.
you're getting
Yeah.
good at fishing for segues. And you're also getting good at ignoring that I called you a love slave and you didn't react to that. That was pretty cool too.
I was having a hard time ignoring that.
You know, that's
Yeah.
my coping mechanism that I've learned. But anyway,
Okay.
we've got a question coming in. I realized Sardinia and Greece invasions were used in the rise of Operation Mincemeat, but why was Sardinia not a stronger target for consideration than Sicily? I imagine with naval supremacy and Allied superiority, the ability to bomb the industrial northern Italy would be more valuable. And that question...
Well, wait. Before you answer that question, Indy, I mean, I think I'm just going to go ahead and guess. I'm just going to give a wild guess. Better food.
Yeah,
I close?
that's it. That's
this is coming from Neil Stoltz, by the way.
Okay. First of all, what he means about the Sardinia and Greece invasions used in Operation Mincemeat, they were deceptions, right? They allowed the Axis to think that there was going to be an invasion of Sardinia or an invasion of Greece and the Balkans or an invasion of Sicily, so they wouldn't know where to defend. They had no intention of invading Greece or the Balkans or Sardinia at the time, just Sicily. But I think you're missing a point there. You're looking back and saying, well, this seems like a target if you're going to attack Italy. They weren't planning to attack Italy, mainland Italy, when they started Operation Husky. There was a huge difference of opinion. The British thought that attacking Italy would tie down enough forces that they would not be able to make a cross-channel invasion in France or Belgium or anywhere cross-channel in 1944. The Americans thought, you've got all these troops down there that are finishing off, because they were still finishing off Tunisia campaign when they were planning Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Thinking, no, we can't have troops sitting around for 9 months. They'll get soft. They need to do something. Sicily seemed like a logical operation. Now, people do not realize that the invasion of Sicily was actually a larger operation than the invasion of Normandy was. It involved more people, right? And with far, far shorter planning and across 250 miles of hostile waters, not from a well-defended coastline in literally swimming distance for some very strong swimmer individuals. Nobody's swimming from Tunisia to Sicily. But they did not know if they were going to be attacking mainland Italy. Sicily was also that midpoint right in the middle of the Mediterranean. Yes, they had aerial supremacy from there. However, until the invasion of Sicily, the Axis powers had hundreds and hundreds of planes on Sicily, all of which were used against Tunisia, and all of which could be used against shipping. They were at a disadvantage, but it was far more strategic than Sardinia. But beyond that, if you were going to invade Sicily, right, it is way, way better to invade Sicily if you're going to invade Italy, it's way better to invade Italy from Sicily, because the Straits of Messina are so close. You don't have to go across hundreds and hundreds of miles of water. If you're only going to do an aerial campaign to bomb industrial targets in northern Italy, then sure, it might be a good idea to hit Sardinia. But leaving Sicily in Axis hands means leaving a big ball in the middle of Mediterranean in Axis hands. This is window dressing, though, because the real reason is there was no plan. Well, there were plans, but there was no, we're going to do this to invade mainland Italy until, one, it turned out the Italians were not willing to fight that much to defend Sicily, and two, Mussolini was removed from power. And that's when they thought, okay, with a Badoglio government, everything's in chaos. The Italian public wants to get out of the war. Yes, when we finish Sicily, now we will invade mainland Italy. But had those things not happened, had the Germans mounted a strong defense in Sicily, but had the Italians mounted a stronger defense, and had Mussolini remained in power and had the confidence of the king and stuff, I don't know if there would have been an invasion of Italy in 43, maybe not until 44, because it would have jeopardized the invasion of Normandy. So Sardinia, it seems attractive for an aerial campaign, but that's not what they were looking at. They were looking at one step.
I'd add two things to that. One pertaining to D-Day. I mean, the lessons learned in Sicily were incredibly important, it turned out. But they also instilled a lot of fear into the men having to go to Normandy, especially the ones coming in with the gliders. Because as you'll see in these episodes, the invasion of Sicily wasn't a walk in the park in any way.
No,
the whole
certainly
landing
not for the gliders.
operations. No, the glider was a mess. It was a real mess, and they learned a lot. So, but that's just an anecdote on the side. But there's another aspect that has to do with the Straits of Messina as well. Because Sicily's so close to Italy, it is also a much more developed region then and now than Sardinia is. So you get, if you take it, you have not just taken the geography and the position in the middle of the Mediterranean, you have taken a better infrastructure than you would get on Sardinia, which helps you maintain airfields and operations in a bigger way. So.
Well, there's way more airfields of themselves on Sicily. And by the end of the first week of Operation Husky, so by like July 17th, seeing into the future, 1943, Italy had withdrawn all of its planes from Sicily to the mainland, conceding the aerial supremacy there. But they still had a lot of planes. Remember, Italy still had like 80 divisions of men until the fall of Mussolini. It was no given that they were going to pull out of the war and were not going to continue to fight well and fight a strong defense of their homeland. So there was nothing that really would have made Sardinia a better target at the time than Sicily.
It really comes down to, we see it in live, we see it playing out live in Ukraine right now, where the Russians have done the exact mistake that invading Sardinia would have been, which is going to a place where you're not really free to move from, and more than anything, trying to take a place that won't give you a stepwise way forward, right? So you're caught in the middle of nowhere, and I think that's a really important point, what you said there, Indy. Sicily is south of Sardinia. That would leave them encircled by Axis troops, and it would be a mess. So there's a bunch of reasons why they shouldn't invade Sardinia.
And also, it's hard enough to coordinate an amphibious invasion across 250 miles, what's that, 400 kilometers of water between Tunisia and Sicily. The water distance between Tunisia and Sardinia is like 3 times the size, or at least twice the size. And with the problems they had, it would have been really prohibitive. And too much risk for too little reward, shall we say.
All right. Well, I think with that being said, it might be time to, and I've been waiting all episode to say this, blabaton about Sabaton.
To blabaton about Sabaton. To blabaton about Sabaton. All right, Ian. Okay,
Sabaton,
now
the Swedish heavy metal band, for those of you listening who are not familiar. And we have a question coming in here, and this is coming from one AJ.
And just to be clear, I really like Sabaton, but I'm not a fan of the blabaton part.
And also to be clear, I told Ian to say that, and he's going to take the fall for it, but it was actually me that said, tell me to blabaton about Sabaton. See, so you can blame me instead of poor Ian, who's just starting his career while I'm in the twilight of my years, in the twilight of my fame, and it's all downhill from here. Okay, don't blame Ian.
I'm doing my
Ian
best
together
to follow, do what I'm told and learn from the best here. So I'm gonna keep shooting up. But I know India's listened. This is coming in from AJ now. I know India's listened to The War to End All Wars. I believe that's Sabaton's song. At least a couple of times.
It's a new album.
New album. At least a couple times at this point. What's your favorite song or songs? One pick for enjoying purely musically, and one pick for context / the event that inspired it. I have no idea what Sparty's musical taste is, so same question to him, either about the album or a recent album of your choice from your preferred genre. So, gentlemen, take it away.
Well, my favorite song from the album overall has to be The Unkillable Soldier, mainly because, it's a really good song, but I'm the star of the video. I got to play Carton de Villa. They sent me down to Serbia to be Carton and to film and to have my eye blown out. If you haven't seen the video, you should just look up Sabaton, The Unkillable Soldier, and you'll see me So it's the second time I've started a Sabaton video. And for those of you who wonder what connection we have with Sabaton, they have there's the channel Sabaton History, because since 2002, I think, every single song that Sabaton has written is about some aspect of military history. It's much like us. We cover wars because we're anti-war, basically. People misunderstand us, they misunderstand them, but that's what they write about. And this is their second album in a row, The War to End All Wars, after The Great War, which is only has songs that cover things of the First World War. And when Joachim and Per, the singer and the bass player, and they're the ones that write the songs, they told me that back in 2004 they were thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had a TV station that could tell the stories, the actual history behind the songs that we can't cover in just 3 minutes or 3 or 4 verses, right? So when I first met Per, because he guested on The Great War, I went up to visit Per and Joachim in Falun in Sweden, where they're from, because it's a Swedish band. And then we came up with the idea for the Sabaton History channel. And I know I'm rehashing things for many of you, but what it is we've made like 108 episodes now. We've covered every single song that Sabaton has ever written, some of them twice or even 3 times with different aspects. And it starts off with me telling the actual history of what the song's about, and then an interview with me and somebody from the band about some weirdness from the song, about the song itself, about something about touring with the song, or yada, yada, yada. So I am going to blab-a-ton about Sabaton. But The War to End Wars, my favorite song is, of course, The Unkillable Soldier, because I was the star of the video. My favorite song...
I have to say, I actually hosted 2 episodes of Sabaton as well. Remember that?
That's true. You did.
Yeah, I jumped in. Yeah. I did one of them in Swedish even, which was weird.
Yeah. Well, they speak Swedish.
You did a Swedish one as well, I think, didn't you?
I speak Swedish too. It's a thing with Time Goes. We just all randomly speak Swedish. Yeah, I did. We did En livstid krig, A Lifetime of War. Yeah, because here's the thing. Right. They did their album that came out 10 years ago, Carolus Rex, which is about King Carl XII, right? Who basically destroyed the Swedish Empire and ruined the country for 150 years, which is kind of what the album's about. But they recorded the album, and there's a Swedish version and an English version. It's the same music, but the singing is different. And A Lifetime of War and En livstid krig, if you follow the lyrics, they're actually not about the same thing. It's not just a translation. They're about 2 different aspects of the 30 Years' War. That you could, be born and you could die when you're 35 years old. If you were born 5 years, you were born in 1611, you'd be 35 when you died, and you would never have known anything other than a lifetime state of war. So that's why I did the Swedish thing. But to answer the question, I think subject matter. I like and they just came out with the video for the song "Race to the Sea" just recently, which has to do with the race to the sea in 1914. Which is one of the biggest misnomers in military history, because what it was the Germans and the British on one side and the British and French on the other side trying to outflank each other as the trench lines were growing towards the North Sea. So the last thing anybody wanted to do was reach the sea, right? It was the race to go around the other guy before we get to the sea, and then there's trench lines from Switzerland all the way to the North Sea. And then we're stuck in trench warfare for years and years. But on another note, I actually went to see Sabaton last night. Their European tour was canceled or postponed because of Corona, but their Swedish tour that was supposed to happen last year was postponed to this year. So they played in Eskilstuna, which is about an hour away from Stockholm. And me and my honey Emily and Maria Schille, who used to do the Patreon and community management for the Sabaton History channel, we went down to see the show. And it was great, for one, and for 2, it was nice to hang out with the guys and see the guys backstage, because I actually became really good friends with all of the band after, so much time spent together, especially all this weird stuff in Tunisia, story for another day. But, I get recognized a fair amount from the Great War or from World War II. and sometimes from Sabaton history when I'm out there. But when I'm at a Sabaton concert in the audience, I didn't realize this. That no, I'm a big celebrity there. I had to do at least 15 or 20 like selfies with people, and you can see there are people that were just looking over, but were too shy to come up. So that was I didn't, you know, of course Sabaton fans are a really large group and a really tight knit group, but I didn't realize that it was going to be like that. But it was because it's the first time I've seen them play. Well, the last time I saw them play was when we were filming last summer in Serbia, but I was only backstage, and so, you know, I wasn't out among the crowd. But that was
I think that working with Sabaton, doing Sabaton history together with them has made, fans of all of us. We even have some people in the crew that didn't listen to heavy metal in any way before, and they've gone to do it. And we spent, when they came out with the Great War album, we were in Verdun together with them.
Yeah.
And that was very moving. It was very, it's funny because it's a little bit something that ties us all together, from both the view also on the tragedy of it, which is, I think, also why my favorite topic. From a context viewpoint, it is the Fields of Verdun, which is my favorite song. But
but that's on the Great War. That's not on the War to End All Wars. But still, they played that last night. Fields of Verdun. Oh, great song. It's a
really, really great song. So that's that, and that just stays with me because it's so.
Okay, I will say this.
Listen to it.
My favorite song on their 2 World War I albums altogether, without a question, is "Attack of the Dead Men." That's my favorite Sabaton song. That's my favorite Sabaton song of all songs, and they did not play that last night. No, it's interesting.
That was in Indy. I know you've seen that, but for anybody who hasn't seen Joachim, the singer of Sabaton, do that on stage, you've missed something. When he's all dressed up in gas mask and he's got a green smoke machine like a flamethrower, it's amazing.
And that's why they couldn't do or didn't do it last night, because this wasn't a giant like Paris, London, Berlin, Stockholm arena tour. It was a Swedish tour with venues that only hold like 1,200, 2,000, 3,000 people. They're not playing in Stockholm because the Stockholm show was part of the canceled European tour, not part of the Swedish tour. That's why I went down to see them. So although it was a big venue and it was packed, the stage was not big enough for the tanks and the barbed wire and everything. It was just a show. But I was gonna say,
it's an amazing stage show.
Yeah, no, it was a great side effect of doing the show, is becoming really good pals with all of the Sabaton guys. But when you mentioned the Verdun trip, it was then that I really realized. I knew they were really big internationally and stuff, and you can see, sure, a power metal band, and they sell a lot. But there's other big power metal bands like Judas Priest and stuff who are bigger, sure. But when we were in Verdun working with them, what they had done was, for the release party of the Great War, they had at their own expense flown 100 metal journalists to France and put them up for a week in Verdun to launch the album and to bring them around on tours of Verdun and have me roped in to talk about the Battle of Verdun and what it actually meant for the war and what it meant for the world, not just the battle, because you got to be nerds like us to really want to hear about just the battle, but to hear about all the actual weirdness that came out of it and how much it shaped our world. And I'm like, that's really cool that you have dedication like that. That's when you really start to get a lot of respect for how much they feel about history and how they treat history. And as Joachim says,
I think it was also, I know we've talked about this after the trip, and especially for those of us who might not have known Sabaton so well before, it really dissipated all of the misunderstandings about, glorifying war and everything. Because something that Joachim Per really put a lot of effort into was also show the journalists and use us to show the journalists how tragic this situation was and how much fascination for war, just like we have it, doesn't have to mean that you like war. It just means that you're fascinated by it. And I know it really, it was an awakening moment, especially for Astrid, who wasn't so familiar with the whole controversy around it. but had then heard about how there had been controversy, and to see how dedicated they were to the whole idea of remembrance and also lifting up the tragedy of the individuals that suffered under what is fascinating history.
And you'll also remember that Tommy, one of the two guitarists, he still was undefeated in the Tommy Challenge against all of the world's great metal journalists. Tommy can still drink a beer faster than any of them. We have some great videos. I don't know if we're ever going to put them up on Sabaton History, although we might as well, because I was the judge. I was the host and judge, me being the host, and me also having been a judge. We'll talk about that another day. I've never been a judge, but yeah, that was a great fun trip. You know, that was our last
Had
real
me
road
standing
trip.
on a table. Remember that, Indy?
Yes.
MCing you, the judge.
Yep.
I
Well,
personally
well,
really like to see some kind of road trip or some meeting of the fans one day soon, and
Well,
perhaps that's just
you know-
because I read you all your comments, guys. But
Well, we did, with the Great War, we did 3 or 4 of them a year, the last 3 years of the war. Well, even starting in 2015. But we haven't been able to do that with this. And the main culprit has been Corona, The France trip was great, not just because of the Sabaton stuff, but we shot, 8 specials for World War II stuff. We could dispel Maginot Line myths by being there on the ground. We went to Jean-Paul de Vries' place in Romagna and had a great fan meeting. And I missed those things. And now we can maybe start doing them again. But that was one of my favorite things about doing the Great War, was going to the places, going to the fan meets. Interestingly enough, when we were going to do the first one, we had finally had enough money coming in from Patreon that we could do a fan thing. Our social media guy then, Florian, he asked the fans, where would you like us to go if we were going to do something on location, a Great War on location? Remember, this is 2015. And we thought people were going to say, oh, go to the Somme or go to Verdun or go to something like that. But no. It was overwhelming. It was like 90% of people said, go to Przemysl in Poland, because I had talked so much. I'd never even heard of Przemysl before I started doing the Great War. But I talked about the siege of it week after week after week after the first airmail ever, Konrad von Hotzendorf sacrificing 800,000 men to fail to free 200,000. And that was, and going there, and that's when you really see the Eastern Front, when you go to Przemysl. There's still so much cool stuff that's there around the fortress town. And you understand why it was a fortress town, because there's one point right near the town when you can walk up on the hill and you can see at least 150 kilometers in every direction. You can see the curvature of the earth. Yeah,
I think that gives us an interesting exit point for today, highlighting the tragedy that while Indy was covering Przemysl as somebody, one of the only people doing that between 2014 and 2018, now it's back in the news. And I mean, it's on the news every day, because once again, Przemysl is in the middle of a war zone, or at the edge of a war zone, I should say.
Well, yeah, a little bit north, but still, it's
but it's.
Oh, we went that trip actually.
Coming in there.
We went to Lviv in that trip. We did some filming and met university professors in Lviv to talk about some stuff. And I thought Lviv, one, is a staggeringly beautiful city. And it's weird because I thought it was going to look more Eastern and more Russian, but it doesn't. It looks like Vienna, but with Orthodox churches instead of Catholic churches, right? Because it was the capital it was Lemberg under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was the capital of Galicia, the easternmost Austro-Hungarian province. And I saw a line of 25, 80-year-old women on segways, segwaying past the opera house. And that's when I thought, okay, I like this town. I like this town. So I'd never seen that before. Wonderful town.
But that is how it is.
Yeah.
History echoes down through the time, and it's nice, and some points right now it's not so nice. But I think that's, once again, I'm going to say this, and I say this all the time, but that's why it's so important to learn about history, because we can put things into context. And once you know that Przemysl was in I can't say it.
Yeah,
You
no,
said it so
yeah.
many times.
Trust me, it took me a while to get it pronounced right. Eventually, the Polish people started saying, "You got it, Przemyśl."
I actually thought it was very entertaining because although I can't say it myself, I know you can, and I remember how you say it. And listening to CNN when the refugee crisis started, and they were covering it from there.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
I didn't
so
see that.
entertaining to
Yeah.
see one journalist after the other try to say
Przemyśl.
Indy.
Przemyśl.
There you go. Przemyśl.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that was pretty
Okay.
good. Yeah.
I think that it's time we wrap up this show, perhaps.
Okay. Don't you have a shout out to do to somebody that is written here under things we might talk about?
Yes, it is. AJ, I just want AJ asked the last question that we spent the last 15 minutes or so on. I noticed that your profile picture is a RuneScape avatar, and I have spent many, many years of my life playing RuneScape, many days consecutively. I think it's 120 days consecutive that I've spent on that game. You can check your total playtime. And that was up until about the age of 16. And actually, most of you on Patreon, even though maybe we're not in constant contact or that, you're not directly messaging me, Sparty, and Indy all the time, there's a lot of you that I feel a little personal connection to, whether it be because I recognize which game your profile picture is from, or whether or not it be because you always comment at the same time or about the same thing. But you are seen, and I love you all. So
You guys like the same thing at Subway? Like you all like the Italian BMT. Like it's just a crazy coincidence.
yeah, I can't believe it. All right.
Okay. All right. Well then, goodbye from me, Indy Nidell.
Goodbye from me, Spartacus.